Imagine escaping from a prison in the middle of the ocean, with guards numbering twice the number of prisoners, and patrols at random intervals. Add to that snipers with orders to eliminate any person they suspect. But despite all these fortifications, 3 prisoners managed to escape from Alcatraz prison. If you want to know the details of the escape, watch the video until the end.
Hello everyone. Alcatraz prison was opened in 1934. And the escape we are going to talk about today happened in 1962. Since Alcatraz was established, there have been 14 escape attempts. All of them failed, except for one. The people involved in this escape were Alan West, Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin. Together, they destroyed the myth of the impregnable prison. Alcatraz prison was built on an island in the San Francisco Bay, about 2 kilometers from the mainland. It was known as one of the most fortified prisons. It was specifically designed to house the most dangerous criminals in the world, such as Al Capone, George Machine Gun Kelly, and the killer Robert Stroud. Inside Alcatraz, prisoners were assigned various tasks, including haircuts, cleaning, maintenance, and others. One day, Alan West was cleaning the surface of his cell. He noticed a small hole that seemed weaker than the other holes. Behind it, there were iron bars leading directly to the roof of the prison. After finishing cleaning, he went to his friend Frank Morris, whose cell was next to his, and told him about the hole on the roof. Frank started thinking about a plan to escape from the prison. Frank was a very intelligent person compared to other prisoners. His IQ was 133. The first thing he did was call in his brothers, John and Clarence Anglin, whose cells were near each other. And so, they became 4 prisoners who agreed on escaping. In each cell at the prison, there was a small hole, which led to a passage for the air ducts and water, and then the hole above the cell, as you can see in the video. Frank noticed that these holes hadn't been maintained for a long time, and they had weakened over time. The salt from the sea made them fragile. This was their only way out of the cell. So even if they thought of another escape route, there was only this hole and the cell door. The first thing the 4 did was steal spoons from the prison's kitchen to use them for digging through the concrete at the hole. Of course, digging would take them months of continuous work. The work was divided into 3 prisoners, who would dig and 1 who would watch the guards. This slowed down the digging process even more, but at least they could dig safely without worrying about the guards. They also made fake holes similar to the original ones using cardboard and some cement to cover them on the wall. They would cover the hole with clothes, musical instruments, and other things to hide it during the day if the guards came. According to an FBI report, around 80 prisoners saw them digging, but no one spoke up or reported them. Once they finished the hole, they thought about how to get out of the prison, which was located in the middle of the water. What they did was smuggle coats, which were available in large quantities in the prison, to make a small raft to escape the island. Fortunately for them, the guards didn't count these coats, so they gathered around 50 coats to make the inflatable raft and life jackets. Once they gathered the coats, Frank Morris suggested that they use the roof of the cell as a workshop to build the raft. He convinced the guards that when cleaning, dust would scatter into the cell below. So Alan West, under Frank's instructions, convinced the guards to place covers to prevent the dust from spreading. He would scatter the dust on the guards when they walked past him. The prison management allowed him to do that, and of course, this was one of the most critical mistakes made by the prison management, and the key to continuing their plan. This gave them a place to work on the raft, and they also worked on cutting the iron bars of the hole above the cell at the same time. They made fake heads using soap, dust, paste, and toilet paper. They used hair that Clarence Anglin had gathered from his job as a prison barber. They placed the fake heads in their beds to cover them during the operation, since, as we said, the guards made random patrols very often. The period they worked on the raft was at night because if the guards came with the darkness of the night, they wouldn't suspect that these heads were fake. And there was also someone monitoring the guards. After 2 months of continuous work on the raft, the big escape night finally came. On the night of June 11, 1962, they placed the fake heads and headed to the roof of the cell. But Alan West couldn't open the hole, and it's likely that he put too much cement on it, causing it to harden. Digging it again would take a very long time. But the four had agreed that if any problem occurred for one of them, they would leave them behind and continue the escape. So, Frank Morris, John, and Clarence Anglin managed to get out, but unfortunately for Alan West, he couldn't leave his cell. Once the three escaped from the roof of the prison, they headed straight to the shore. They only had to cut through a light fence, which they did easily, and continued on their way. When they reached the shore, they inflated the raft using a musical instrument that Frank Morris had modified to release only air. The next day, at about 7 a.m. the guards began the morning count of the prisoners. During the count, each prisoner had to be standing and facing the guards. But when they reached Frank Morris's cell, they called him multiple times, but he didn't respond. One of the guards entered to wake him up, but the shock came when they saw the head fall to the ground. The alarm immediately went off, and FBI investigators arrived, starting to interrogate the prisoners. Of course, the first one was Alan West, as it was clear he was involved in the operation. Alan West, according to reports, was cooperative with the investigators but didn't tell them the whereabouts of his friends. The authorities searched the entire island and everything on it, and they activated a significant part of the sea, but the prisoners had vanished. The complicated escape operation and all the months of continuous work bore fruit, and the prisoners succeeded in escaping from one of the most fortified prisons in the world. Anyway, the FBI investigations didn't stop until 1979, 17 years after the escape. The investigation concluded that the prisoners drowned because they found bags made from the same raincoats used to make the raft. Inside these bags, there were photos and letters for the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence. This was the main evidence the FBI relied on to conclude that the prisoners drowned, as these photos and letters would have been very valuable to the brothers. However, many researchers objected to the theory that the prisoners drowned, because if they drowned, it would have been impossible not to find their bodies, especially with the large search operation conducted by the FBI, since the bodies would have floated on the water and wouldn't have stayed at the bottom. Later, a photo was found, believed to be of the Anglin brothers, in 1975, 13 years after the Great Escape. However, this photo is not 100% confirmed. In 2013, the FBI received a letter from someone claiming to be one of the brothers, John Anglin, and he stated that he was ready to surrender in exchange for treatment due to cancer, and that he was now 83 years old. There's no clear evidence to confirm the authenticity of this letter. After the escape, many theories spread. But until today, there is no definitive proof of what happened to the prisoners after their escape. 1 year after the escape, on March 21, 1963, Alcatraz prison was closed. The federal government stated that it would be easier to build a new prison than to repair and restore Alcatraz. We don't know if this was the main reason or if it was the escape operation, which became a shame for the most fortified prison in the world. And that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it.